Human beings are human beings, no matter what capitalism wants us to do. There's a part of our souls that are being harmed by how we engage with each other and by how an institution may engage with us. And healthcare, a lot of other social services are largely inhumane in the States. So it's very stressful for people to relate to themselves as a person throughout the continuity of their life.
Welcome, everybody. I am Michael Munson, and this is the next episode of Just Healing. I'm really excited to have today Shalonda Ingram, who is going to share with us some concepts that are unique and different and some of the topics that we haven't explored before. So welcome, Shalonda. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the community for having me in the space. I really am honored to get to be with you.
Yeah, thank you. I've been starting with most folks with just let's honor our space here and let's get to know you. So I do know that folks are from lots of different places that are listening. And we were just talking a minute ago about people being in the sky, maybe flying on the plane, listening to this podcast. So if we can take a moment and just acknowledge that we are on different lands across our country or across multiple countries, and that harm has been done to our lands, and that healing can happen. Why don't we start with, who are you? What brings you here? What brings you to our conversation today?
Sure. Well, who I am is a human being that was born in St. Louis, Missouri, and I've had a very unique journey. And part of what inspired my being in this dialogue with you was a unique opportunity to hold space at an event with the Pride Study and NIH at Stanford. And I had an opportunity to speak with health and wellness practitioners and commitment leaders on the topic of institutional violence and how to heal from institutional violence while building communities of practice, which is ultimately what folks are doing on the margins. I think people call it lots of things: activism, advocacy, development, whatever. But really, it's a system of lifting and climbing and also protecting one's well-being simultaneously. Affectionately known in many communities as like auntying, right? Where you're kind of doing a lot of different things at once while also being incredibly protective of some of the outcomes. And so when people are in these circumstances, it may be very difficult for them to see, oh, I'm doing the same thing repeatedly and getting the same results. So it's about finding pathways in and out of the dynamics that folks need in community, not like all by yourself, go it alone, colonial energy, but how do I heal and develop my wellness in community, right? And so there's a lot to that, and I've been fortunate to have a lot of opportunities to heal throughout my life, and I've started to put together workshops and retreats and opportunities for folks to practice their new skills while acknowledging some of what may not be working out for them.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. And you mentioned so many different words, and I know we're going to talk about a lot of those phrases that you used, because for some of us, those just kind of roll off our tongue. And for others of us, it's like, oh my God, what did you just say?
Yeah,
so
let's break it down.
Let's break it down. Yeah.
When I say institutional violence, I mean, it may seem to be an opportunity. Like, hey, let's send your child to a better school in a desegregation program. And you may not know that you're simultaneously signing your child up to effectively divest in the neighborhood that you own property in, right? Institutional violence may look like, oh, these women of color are gradually being indulged in reproductive violence, and now we're starting to learn that. Or Gila, the circumstances of that family in Baltimore. And, public health is often connected to educational health and research without consent. So those are all types of institutional violence. And then, of course, individuals are experiencing these at a micro or macro level constantly, right? It might look like a credit card predatory billing situation, or not having a local post office. I mean, there's all sorts of versions of this. It may be you may not have a DMV within 20 miles of your community, and makes it difficult to get proper identification, etc. So there's so many levels and layers to it, on up the ladder, to say not having representation that looks like you in your government, right, or local municipalities. So it's on every level of our lives in the US that we are existing in a relationship to our value in the capitalistic context. So if I'm not a patient to a medical practitioner, but like an anxiety, oh no, I got to prescribe something to this person, or I'm only going to make $12 for this visit, that compromises everyone, right? And so the relationship that, say, a person who went to medical school may want to have with me is not allowed through the insurance process that they need to deal with to support and sustain themselves. So those are all layers, right? And I hope that really helps folks get that bureaucracy and violence are often intertwined. And some people actually have trauma with filling out forms, or being afraid of, what does it mean when I sign this? Or people are uneducated, may not be capable of reading at the proper level in order to engage. So it's very broad and very brutal for various folks at different levels of the society.
Thank you. And I think, some of what you brought up, I think a lot of times people would not think of those things as violence, or as institutional violence, and they definitely are. And so, to kind of hear you deconstruct that, I think a lot of people are more aware of that these days, as we're talking about reproductive health and how that system is getting affected by this institution of our government. So I think people are more aware of it.
Yeah.
Do you have some other examples that you can share? I mean, those examples were just amazing.
Let's say your local library. What is it like? Is it inviting? Does it have hours? Can you vote there? Right? So all of these things sort of interlock. Another example would be insurance in one neighborhood that has been divested in, being extremely distinct from another neighborhood that has been invested in. So all of these levers intertwine. Across the board to employment. Okay, let's fill out a QR code. Well, do I have a nice cell phone that can do that, etc.? So it just is very pervasive in the culture.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's interesting you brought up libraries, because I think, as someone who works in the trans community, it's like there's so much access denial going on right now. Like, do I have an ID that I can get a card to go to the library?
Yeah.
Are there going to be books at the library that are going to relate to me?
Yes.
Am I a person of color? Am I going to see books that reflect that? So I love that example because it's so practical.
Well, in the two terms, right? Like, people don't really love bureaucracy, no matter who they are. They want to sort of not have to do extra things, or there's a curiosity of, well, why do I have to do this, right? And so that tension and relationship is one of the many exhausting things that people on the margins are dealing with, right? So if you have a minimum wage job and now you have all these responsibilities in order to access, you can't do it, right? It's impractical. And so these are the types of things I want us to have more empathy for each other around, because I may have a class difference than someone that provides me more time to deal with this bureaucratic violence. So it doesn't mean that I should shun them. I should have an opportunity to know, oh, their interaction with the system is gravely different than mine, and that impedes our ability to maybe care for each other or be thoughtful about each other. So
Yeah.
for me, it's not about the system as much as it is about how we humanize ourselves as we engage with it, right? And remember that, oh, Michael's a person who's wanting to have a conversation, whether or not the system is promotional of that, right? Between the two of us, we're fortunate, but there's so many people riding the same bus, on the same subway, etc., that are just completely at odds psychologically and spiritually, and it causes us all distress in our lives. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And this podcast is for, intended for men who may have experienced sexual violence or sexual harm.
Mm-hmm.
And when we were thinking about, when I was thinking about what kind of questions do I have for you, I was thinking a lot about some of the priest abuse of young boys, and how, to me, that's like kind of, I don't want to say it's the ultimate in institutional violence, but to me, that's like a big, big I institutional violence.
Yep.
And so many of those young boys really were in silence and siloed for 20, 30, 40 years. And I think, I'm curious if you have comments on that institutional violence of that.
I do, yeah.
And then how that relates to wellness. Yeah.
Yeah, well, part of what makes the violence of a spiritual community so profound is its embedment in the society, right? And so one would imagine that its leadership for morale would not be its abuser as well. Depending on your relationship to religiosity and the preciousness of that, there could be all sorts of dynamics or consequences surrounding that. And when someone commits violence in a community context, it's not just personal violence, it's also communal violence, right? And so those layering and those dynamics can be very difficult, especially for young people who this is their world. There are no other characters, there is no other game. This is the entire universe, right? And so to be harmed in those contexts can be excruciating, and to not have an outlet for extraordinary periods of time. A lot of people internalize it, they abuse themselves, and I myself have experienced violence of that nature, and the work of forgiving people who were also violated, right? And so it's a perpetuation of harm that very few people have the capacity and means to really get into the work required to heal. And as we know and trust each other in community, we could be more of a perpetual healing agency toward each other, rather than, oh, either you have therapy or you don't. It's, no, we understand this person had a tragedy, and we get to be kind and sensitive, as well as, support their evolution. But this idea that someone committed a crime or harm and they're protected by an institution is also what continues to batter the injured people. And so we're experiencing this with Supreme Court leadership. We're experiencing this with, sex work and other traditions that come from an environment of repression. And so all of those things are so layered in that it's extremely difficult to untether them. But each individual can experience their healing, and it does require at some point a community to hold that. I think it's really stressful for people who've been abused to acknowledge that abuse and to live with that personal forgiveness and communal forgiveness all day, every day, right? And I think for groups, whether in this case we're speaking about the Catholic Church, there are some apologies that are starting to be made, right? And even though that there's a lot of pain in that, the unfolding is happening, right? And so I know that justice delayed is really stressful to people. And at the same time, we're all still healing ourselves and moving forward, right? And so it's a very delicate social challenge, and the repression is so profound that the acting out matches it, right? It's like so many people are experiencing molestation, incest, and other crimes in their intimate culture or community. And so these things, unfortunately, are not missing many of us, no matter our orientation, gender. It is just such a social norm at this point that it could not have infected us without something like religion or something that is such a broad band cultural practice. I really encourage people to develop personal practices and communal practices so that they can navigate the grief also. I really look forward to the ministers, the practitioners of these institutions continuing to be honest and to make reparations and repentance with survivors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, part of what you talked about is kind of this concept of communities being harmed as well as individuals being harmed.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sometimes I think that people look towards institutions to heal. So it's like people look towards institutions that have harmed them to heal, or people look towards communities that have harmed them to heal.
Yep.
So let's break that down a little bit about how can we heal? How can we build communities, of practice that are healthy or healing, or what do we need to do, right?
Sure. Well, part of what I really look toward is what is the positive state of being that is available, right? Because without a positive state of being, which, wellness is just not even possible. It doesn't have a container, so to speak. And I think that a lot of our expectations of institutions we may not be fulfilling on for ourselves, right? And by that, I mean, if I'm not caring for myself, taking myself on walks, making sure I meet with community friends, that I laugh, sometime throughout the week or day or whatever my threshold for evolution is, it's very hard, right? And most people are living in single family households with some sort of institutional violence of the loan that says, oh, no other people will live here with you, right? And, build your household. So depending on where we start looking, the work is just so different. Every roadmap is so different. And some people are suffering with deep, deep depression or maybe even substance abuse, right? Their work plan might need to be a lot more rigorous in some areas and more gentle in others than someone who might be healing from, battery or physical violence, right? So it's not a one size fits all, but it is a when I'm authentic with myself, it's possible type of program. We ultimately define wellness with these 10 sentiments. And this definition was co-created with a team in Berkeley and some folks in Canada as well. And they really focus on positive state of being and the fact that wellness and illness are polar opposites of a continuum of our life, right? And it's not an either or. And then there's the characteristics of wellness, which we define as vitality, joy, and resilience. And it's important to note that resilience is not, it should be temporary, not 20 years of resilience to a type of institutional violence, right? Then we also want to look at wellness reflecting individual, family, community, workplace, media, and environmental interactions. And it's important to note that resilience is not, it should be temporary, not 20 years of resilience to a type of institutional violence, right? Then we also want to look at wellness reflecting individual, family, community, workplace, media, and environmental interactions. And when we say environmental interactions, we mean with the earth, right? Because humans are of the earth. and we've kind of lost touch with that. And if we really want to encourage people to go outside, walk around with no shoes on, like we're electromagnetic beings, and we're not participating in our own science, right? And so things like that are a big part of some of the smaller things that people can just do on their own. I think, unfortunately, we've gotten into this wellness or self-care lingo, and we think of it like, oh no, I need 10 grand for a retreat, or I just can't get started, right? And it's like,
Right.
no, you can contact somebody in your family that may have diabetes and say, hey, do you want to go on a walk once a week? I think you need that. I need that. That's it, right? And so we're in a world of put it in my calendar, all that. No, let's keep it simple. Let's have some human contact, and let's just be more easeful about things, not a huge production. Things don't really need to be that way in order to cultivate wellness. So I think if we continue on this path of our definitions, we also highly value the arts, right? And we believe that art is vital to well-being, and it opens us up to see and feel the world in a fresh way. And then that illness, right, really indicates a lack of resources needed to resolve insults, injuries, threats to well-being, right? So that's that resilience loop where as long as you have enough laughter, enough community to recuperate from what you're dealing with, you have a higher probability of maintaining your wellness. But if you don't engage in things that lighten your load, or let's say you love tennis and you haven't played in 5 years, go play, see what happens. You're going to kind of like open up. And a lot of us are um, hanging on to stuff, right? And like, oh, I'm not going to do this because it reminds me of such and such. Oh, come on. You love it. Go do it, right? And like, give it to yourself, and, consider that you're really harming your orgasmic person by not going out for a run with your best friend, or playing tennis, or giving yourself an hour of joy. And then the other piece is that social injustice, lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion perpetuate societal unwellness. We truly believe that. And that networking within community circles is key to well-being, and that the greater the quality and diversity of one's connections, the greater the vitality, intelligence, and resilience of that entire community. So when I say if someone gets harmed in my community, we are all harmed due to that person's experience of trauma and their withholding of themselves and the time that it takes to them recuperate, if they do and can. So that person is no longer available to us in their vitality during that trauma. And so it sounds subtle, the old takes a village, but it's true. If someone who's keeping the fire in the village gets harmed, we all have a problem, right? So I think that's really a big part of kind of defining wellness for myself. But if we were to keep it very simple, like 1 through 5, it'd be conditions, affect, behaviors, cognition, and outcomes, right? And that's just a little circle of life. And when any of those things are not going well, we could experience a collapse in other areas. So we say it's a continuum, kind of like gender and other things, where if you're having a great journey and someone passes away in your family, now your wellness is compromised. You may need to ramp up your immune system so that you can deal with the grief, right? So it's a constant tending to oneself and being intimate enough with the community so that if something's going on that they can see that you may not be able to see, you still have support, you know. And then just very practically speaking, we're talking about eating moving, reflecting, relating, and serving. Some people think about eating for health as being exhaustive or, very expensive. And what we're really referring to is seasonal, eating what's in season, right? And that'll give you a shot. Eating organic when you can, as much as you can, even if you're just growing a few things in your windowsill. That can be powerful to care for something and to experience touching the plant. It could be small, like a little bitty rosemary, tiny basil from one of your favorite stores. And then unprocessed as much as possible. That's a big one. Local as you can have it happen. And then affordable for you, right? Because that has such a huge range. When we say move, it might be walking. It might be a few yoga stretches, might be a few Tai Chi moves that you learned, might be swimming, could be gardening, right? But the idea is that the movement is joyful. Could be dancing. Just go out to a park, put on your headphones and go for it. So it doesn't have to be produced is the idea. And then reflection is critical, right? And this could look like journaling, could look like a meditation, or practicing relaxing, right? And if you're someone from workaholic traditions of force, you may have a struggle relaxing and just not expecting someone to come and tell you what to do, right? Or what does that feel like, right? And you may not be able to do it for a long time at first. It might be 5 minutes and you're like, oh, I'm up doing stuff, right? Set a timer, see if you can do 10 minutes, and just be in love with oneself, right? And sort of practice courting yourself, right? We know how we are when we have a boo. We're like, oh, boo, let's do this, right? What if we're treating ourselves like that as much as possible? Our inner child, have a relationship with that, right? Healing relationship with that. And also service. That's a big one. And service could be hosting a podcast or volunteering like you across the board to, oh, I know my neighbor is paraplegic. Let me see if they need help, because that could just be what I do. Not a big thing, but they may not even want the support. But the act of being a little more selfless and not just scrolling through on our Black Mirror could open something up, right? And so sometimes we think of, oh, I have to go to a soup kitchen. I have to find a place. No, everything is right there around you. You might just make the place better for yourself, right? And say, oh, I could do a little meal prep, make my week easier, right? So it often we're looking at a big concert or something like this. We want to do those activities too. But the day to day, right? That's really where we want to be. What happens between things, right? How do you talk to yourself? What's going on in there? And how does it get more and more kind as you care for yourself? That's really the sort of like micro evolution, right? Like all the little stuff that, oh, maybe I could get some things for a smoothie instead of eating this massive cake right now, right? So it's like, I'm still going to get my sugar, but like over the course of 5 days, not in 5 minutes, right? So it can be as gradual as we need to be real, as how I see it. And sometimes this stuff is dark, right? So I don't want to make light of it. It could be you have an eating disorder. You might be strung out on something that you're hiding from your community. So whatever it is, it's about moving toward the lightness and the joy of that life has to offer, while simultaneously keeping it real, right? Because you don't want to leap into some space that you're not able to manage. But the other thing that's really important is replace things, right? So if you say you're going to stop smoking cigarettes, let's just say that's a big one in the LGBTQ community, then what are you going to do instead, right? Just so that you have that thing of, oh, I'm going to chew this bubble gum, or I'm going to do 5 push-ups or whatever, so that we are not expecting ourselves to heal faster than we were harmed. right? And for most of us, it's been years and years and years and years of holding this stuff, and we want it out like in 2 minutes, right? And it's
Right.
we have to keep digging, keep working, and being patient and light with ourselves,
Mhm.
because a lot of these traumas are daily, right? Especially for our trans brothers and sisters. Your politicians, your leaders might be saying really cruel things, and it's hard to feel safe. So how do you keep recovering yourself? It's
Mhm.
like we need to develop those systems. And it is burdensome, and it is unfair, and it's still necessary and possible to enjoy it, right? And to say, you know what, I'm going to turn on my house music and get it together for this day. You
Yep.
know? And
Yep.
like really
Mhm.
be within the comfort of my own company, right? And then kind of let that reverberate out, because some of us are really struggling and suffering, and we're not able to let the light in, right?
Mhm.
And when love comes, we're like, you know,
Right. Yeah.
excuse you.
What? Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah.
So we want to discern, like, oh, I'm somebody who fill in the blank, right? And we know
Mhm.
ourselves so profoundly. Most of us are like addicted to our struggle and hanging on to it, right? And so when this opportunity to grow our own personal constitution with how we manage our day to day, moment to moment, a lot of us have given up, and we don't take it seriously. We don't trust ourselves. And so that makes for a very toxic community, gossip, all kinds of stuff becomes prevalent in the space when people are feeling that kind of low vibration.
Mhm.
But what I really want folks to take from, at least from my work, is that uh, you didn't create the culture that you inherited, right? And that you can create a culture that you want to live, though, right? And that is a personal commitment that can also become a communal commitment. And when we talk about privilege or groups in power, they are doing what they're committed to doing. So we must be equally committed to doing what we're committed to doing. And, that may be oppositional, and it's not
Mhm.
always.
Yeah.
But for the most part, if we put as much energy into our healing as we do into our disdain or our frustration with ourselves and others, we would have a lot more positive energy flowing through the community.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I think you just brought up something that I always struggle with, which is, kind of the resistance to
Mm-hmm.
what's going on versus kind of more proactively changing to what I would like the world to be, or what many of us would like it to be. And,
Mm-hmm.
for some people, I always have to remember, for some people, they want to be out in the streets and they want to be fighting the fight. And
Mm-hmm.
for others of us, we want to be doing our activism or doing our networking in a different way. And both
Mm-hmm.
can be there.
Yeah,
Um, and we
totally.
have to respect that both can be there. So it's,
Yes. Yes.
yeah,
Well, and
which
I
is
don't want to mistake protesting as joyful movement, right? Because that is
right.
not a joyous endeavor. It is physical movement, but for the most part, when there's a beef or a fight or a struggle, we're actually giving ourselves a lot of cortisol that we then
Right.
have to manage, right?
Yeah,
And so
right.
there's,
Yeah.
it's like, okay,
Yep.
let's check in about that. And it's all relative, it's all important, but how we protest is also a part of there can be wellness in that too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as you're talking about that, I'm just thinking like, okay, I know that I know my folks that go out on the streets, it's like they can do that and I can make some soup for them, right? I can make some
Hmm.
restorative space,
Yeah,
or
totally.
have some low lights or whatever it is. Like we
Hmm.
don't have to always be the ones that do whatever that thing is,
Yeah.
but we
Yeah,
can help nourish in that
absolutely.
community. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, and there's like here in DC, when there's a protest, one of the churches that I work with, we just set up tear gas stations, right, to help people clean out their eyes,
Been
go to the
nice.
restroom, and
Yep.
just recover. So it doesn't matter to us what they're protesting. Sometimes we learn, oh, this is going on over here, or We didn't know about maybe the issue in Tigray, for example, until people are pouring down the street. So it's not to discourage anyone or anything as much as it is to integrate and hold everyone's moment as like sacred, because we're all kind of moving through, and unless we trap each other there, anyone can heal, right? But if I don't forgive you, and if I always only remember Michael said this one time, then that's who you are, right? But if I'm like, oh,
No.
Michael and I, we're family, we're community, we had a thing, that's a different level of capability. And it's not always safe to do the work with everybody, right? And we can just be real about that. But for the most part, this institutional context, we are also holding it in place, because the board or whoever the people are running the place, we have a sort of a crisis of the capitalistic mindset where companies are run by people, and yet they get treated as if they're separate and apart. And so it's a very difficult space sometimes to have like meaningful dialogue across class and across culture, that it can be difficult, but I find that it's worth it.
It is.
Yeah.
This is a little bit of an aside, but
Yeah.
one of the reasons that I like being on Men Healing's board
Yeah.
is we have moved to a non-hierarchical structure. So technically I'm on the board because, I'm a legal signing member or whatever, but we've moved to a system of pods where there's an energy pod, there's a direct service pod. So we're not interacting in this top-down framework. And it's like, it confuses the heck out of some people, right? I mean, just not the people that we're working with, but like, what is this? But on the other hand, it's so freaking beautiful to do something that's not like one person is in control of the other person. And so it's, I know it's an aside to what we're talking about, but it's a different way that we can exist in the world.
Yeah.
And I think that's really fantastic. So,
well, that's, it's the original way, right? Like that's, it's the matriarchal way. It's circles, not lines, and so there's a way that human beings are human beings, no matter what capitalism wants us to do with our bodies while we're on this earth. And we all have a desire to be a part of things, to be caring, to be cared for, and to ask for help, right? And to be in the spirit of indulging with each other. We're pack mammals, right? And we're highly domesticated, and we're still mammals. And so there's a part of our souls that are being harmed by how we engage with each other and by how an institution may engage with us. And healthcare, a lot of other social services are largely inhumane in the States, right? And so it's very stressful for people to relate to themselves as a person throughout the continuity of their life, right? Because if you get a good job or you go to this school, it's all hierarchical. But in the pods or in the circles that you're describing, none of that matters, because we have institutional wisdom of one another's lives, right? And we value each other's stories. And someone could speak Ebonics and still be cared for and integrate it for what they're sharing, not how it sounds, right? And so I think a lot of humanity is disheveled by these logistics that are being imposed upon us that have nothing to do with who we are. So I think the freedom is in just remembering those characters of life. I have started to really heal with some family members. I was taught certain things about people of the global majority growing up in mostly white spaces. I was very confused about the dignity and humanity of my people intentionally, right? I never had a Black leader as an educator, for example. So I had to really learn, my people know things, right? And they're worth listening to, because I was not indoctrinated to know that, right? And so it can be very brutal to find our way to listening to each other and to remembering that it's not all in a book, right? It might just be coming from the person on the bus stop that's like humming. And you're like,
Yes.
whoa,
Yes.
that's the magic I need today,
Mhm.
right? And so
Right.
it's just rematriating ourselves to each
Mhm.
other, right? And repatriating ourselves to each other, and allowing institutions to serve us, but to recognize their design, and that the transactional culture that we live in was not designed for human beings. It's designed for money to move. And so
Mhm.
when we can say, oh, I'm a human being, like it's up
Right.
to me to
Right.
remember that,
Yeah.
it can really change the course of your day.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing up the bus stop kind of conversations, because like those are the kind of conversations. It might be two words or just a smile,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, oh my god, I just had a connection with somebody, and
Yep.
we had that moment of joy or whatever the moment was.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, which is beautiful, really, really
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah. And it
Yeah,
doesn't have to be single family housing related. Oh, I
right,
can't engage with you because it's like, no, we
right,
want to peel that back. We really want to experience the world and each other in it. Yeah.
right, exactly. This feels like a really good place for us to kind of wind down. Do
Sure.
you have anything else that you want to share before we
Mm.
close today?
I do want to share that LGBTQ health and wellness is a very deep passion of mine, and it's a commitment that I I made by force, so to speak. I had some health challenges, experienced some grief, and some elders passing away from, say, reproductive health and other challenges that I didn't know they were having. So I've made it a personal mission to keep it very real with myself and my close orbit, and also to participate in the Pride study and studies like that, so that our health and wellness can be demystified by us over time, and that we're able to participate in uh, making the world a safer, healthier place through offering our own data into communities that we have sovereignty in, where previous it's been very stressful to get the community to this point. And I think a lot of us are exhausted by different things. And some of us are inheriting a community that is imperfect still. And so I want us to experience the totality of our community, no matter what people are calling themselves. I also really want folks to invite themselves to participate in their wholeness, right? And by that, I mean, take yourself out on a date, right? Write yourself a love note. Like, do something that you may find odd for your relationship with yourself, and really develop that, right? So, those are elements that I would leave folks with. And that no matter where you are on the journey, there's so many directions to go. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much for spending time. I really, really appreciate you, and the time that you spent with me, the
Yeah.
time that you spend with the world, and your energy that goes out. So thank
Thank
you.
you so much.